Hello there, Cope1Knope here, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be reviewing Death Troopers. This is a Star Wars Legends novel that came out in 2009 and was written by Joe Schreiber, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this novel is of course well known for introducing zombies into the Star Wars universe, but is self-contained enough where it has no effect on the galaxy. And that's obviously the main attraction that brings people to this novel. Now this novel made it into the Essential Legends collection, which to be honest I don't think it really deserves. I mean, for starters, it doesn't seem essential at all, but I'll speak more about that later on. So to summarise the plot, Trig and Kale Longo are brothers who are inmates aboard the Imperial prison barge called Purge. We get a small glimpse of their prison life and their rivalries, but this is just a very small glimpse. We are then introduced to the captain of the guard, Jareth Sartoris. Now this man is responsible for the death of the Trig and Kale's father, who was also an inmate previously. He is summoned by the warden because the engines of Purge have failed. However, luckily enough, there seems to be an abandoned Star Destroyer nearby, which Jareth is ordered to retrieve spare parts from to fix the engines of the prison barge. So he takes a crew to do just that. However, on their return back, all the crew bar Jareth himself have become sick with some form of aggressive illness, which Jareth seems unaffected by. Now after this point, this sickness just spreads like wildfire, and the book paints a horrid picture of, people being sick and coughing and all sorts of horrible things going on. The prison barge's chief medical officer, Sahara Cody, attempts to contain the virus. However, this seems pretty hopeless with how quickly people are dying from it, that now she's just determined to make everyone as comfortable as possible before they pass. Sahara soon realises that she's immune, considering the exposure she's had to this virus and the fact that she's showing no symptoms whatsoever. After finding out she's immune, Sahara begins to create an antivirus using her blood. We then go back to the brothers Trig and Kale, who escape their cells and just come across horrific things as they try to make their way through the ship. One of which is a Wookiee child who is grieving its parents who have died. It's reluctant to go anywhere, and later on you hear screams from the little Wookiee. So some pretty horrible things happening on this ship. We go back to the medical officer Sahara, who searches for survivors. She activates a bioscan and discovers there are only 6 people remaining who are still alive on the ship. She sees that 2 of them are in solitary, so she heads down there and releases 2 prisoners who happen to be familiar faces and injects them with the antivirus. And then from this point, the rest of the plot follows these 6 characters navigating through the ship and eventually heading over to the Star Destroyer, where they attempt to survive as well. So in terms of characters, we have the 2 brothers, Trig and Kale Longo. So these are both only young. The Trig is a teenager, whilst Kale I think is only a few years older. They always stick together and they work together very well. And they also kind of have like the shared trauma of losing their father. And they kind of just barely survive in prison by the sounds of it. They've made some enemies in there. And they may have not lasted much longer had the virus not kicked off. But to be honest with you, these aren't the most interesting protagonists in the world. You kind of just want to root for their survival because they're so young, especially Trig. He's just a teenager. And you want them both to survive because they're brothers. So it seems almost like a cheap way to be invested. On a similar topic, we have Jareth Sartoris, who was the captain of the guard. He's just kind of a psychopath, and that's about it. He's kind of just your standard like Imperial officer who's selfish and is just cruel for the sake of being cruel. I think the reason the brother's father had died is because he was under interrogation by Jareth and he just took things too far. I'm sure the book mentioned he had a history of doing that, so he's willing to get off the ship once this virus kicks off by any means, and is willing to just shoot anyone in his way. Now a minor spoiler, but he gets a very cheap redemption at the end, which I'm guessing this was just probably done through pure guilt, so I don't really think he becomes a good person at the end. Now moving on to by far the most interesting character, and that's Sahara Cody. So she's the chief medical officer on the prison barge. Now she doesn't want to work for the Empire anymore. She forms connections to like the inmates as she nurses people back to health, and I think she gained respect from the inmates as well. And I guess seeing the way the Empire have treated them, she doesn't want to be part of that anymore. So I think she was scheduled to leave at the next stop. So she's constantly trying to do good throughout the book. She has a connection to the brothers because she carried out their father's last request. to bring them to him. She didn't abandon her post when the virus all kicked off. She stayed there till the very end for all the inmates. Which is obviously a very brave thing for her to do, because she didn't know she was immune when that was all kicking off. And then instead of just running straight for an escape pod, she looks for other survivors. And throughout the book, she wants everyone to work together and everyone to get through this and survive. And this is heading into spoiler territory now. There's a point where she finds a note from one of the inmates before they died from the virus that was meant for his wife, and she keeps hold of that note and makes sure to deliver it at the end of the novel. Now moving on to the 2 inmates that Sahara released that were deemed highly dangerous. Again, spoiler warning, but these were revealed to be Han Solo and Chewbacca. Now, I mentally rolled my eyes when I read this. They really did not need to be in this book at all, and just by being there, most of the tension and suspense just disappears instantly, because obviously we know Han and Chewie are going to survive, because this takes place before A New Hope, and I assumed it was completely standalone with no familiar characters. This definitely spoiled the book quite a bit for me, I think. So in terms of my thoughts on the book, I did think it was a bit disappointing. I didn't know what to expect, because I don't think it's known to be a well-written novel or anything. It's purely the idea of zombies being in Star Wars, and the book covers themselves are a selling point for this book, and the reason why people pick it up. It's certainly the reason why I picked it up, especially since it was added to the Essential Legends collection, as I'm going through them books at the minute, as, I mean, they're just really nice to look at, I think. So I was quite excited to read this one, especially I've been watching The Walking Dead as well at the same time. Speaking of which, I do wish it kind of followed the structure of The Walking Dead, which in the author's defense, the show hadn't been out yet. But I wish it had maybe a bigger group. It would have been a longer novel obviously, but a bigger group of characters, and it could have maybe all took place on one planet that is just secluded, and maybe people are warned to not go to their planet. It could be, I don't know, on the unknown regions or something. Just basically an excuse where the virus can be contained in a sense. So if it's just one infested planet and it doesn't spread anywhere else, it doesn't affect the rest of the galaxy. I mean, something like this could work in a canon novel as well, where you have a bigger cast of characters with more interesting backstories and personalities. Characters that you really get invested in, and you're rooting for them all to survive. Obviously, some will have to get picked off at times. And setting-wise, because it's set on the planet, there's so many situations and places the story can go. Whilst this book was all just stuck on, like, ships in space, and it wasn't particularly Star Warsy. You could have had a Force-sensitive character, for example, or have the inmates, some be like bounty hunters, some be rebels or something, making it a bit more large scale, having it on the same planet. And it could have easily gone on to be a series. I think the book is too vague a lot of the time as well, and felt a bit disorientating to read, which, I mean, could have been the intention for all I know. But kind of the way the zombies are dealt with, at first all the bodies disappear, and that's quite creepy. And then they won't appear for a while, and it's more just hints towards them being around. They'll be described as sounds, or they may like see figures, but it's not entirely obvious that they're the zombies. And a lot of characters thinking they're seeing or hearing things, but it's not entirely explained if they are. And also the way the environments are described. The way the zombies act as well seems a bit inconsistent. I think the point the author was going for is that that's evolving, I think. Because they seem to become more capable the more the story goes on. I just don't think they were described well enough overall. I couldn't tell you what like the rules of the Star Wars zombies are. For example, most zombies, you get bit, you become a zombie, and you gotta like shoot them in the head or something specific. But yeah, at some points it's implied they're a hive mind, some points it's implied they're physically weaker, but doesn't really explain how it works. So I think ruined the story a bit, on top of including like legacy characters that we know are going to make it through. The way the author describes the areas they're in as well is quite vague, so especially when they get to the Star Destroyer, it's all just described as dark corridors and things, and I have no clue where like the characters are half the time. And I think there's a lot of cheap plot points. For example, like how all the survivors happen to be connected in a sense. Like obviously all the main characters have to be immune, because otherwise it'll be an even shorter book than it is already. But the survivors all happening to have the same connection is very convenient, and the only ones that don't are Han Solo and Chewbacca, who are legacy characters that I guess are brought in for surprise value. And there's not really any character arcs in this, so I think that's why they throw in the cheap redemption of Jareth. And then for shock value towards the end, they kill off one of the brothers who I just wasn't really invested in anyway. Now I do think with some improvements I would have quite enjoyed the book. I do like how some of the graphic things are described. And then there are some horror elements that just aren't touched upon enough. Like, we find out that this was all started from an Imperial experiment. So I would have liked to know more about that. But like the bodies disappearing and things. There are some imagery that is creepy and eerie. I'm sure if they brought out some form of adaptation, like a one-off TV special or something, like I'm sure it would be an enjoyable watch. But I think it's the zombie genre just carries the novel, as does the cover art, I think, which is really cool on both covers. So in terms of a rating, for characters I'm going to give it 2 stars. Now this is because I was only really invested in like 2 of the characters, but only really liked one of them. I didn't necessarily dislike the other characters, it's just that there wasn't much to them. Sahara was really the only interesting character, and the inclusion of Han Solo and Chewie also bring the score down. They were just not needed at all, and it seems like pure fan service, and it almost ruins the immersion as well. It's kind of like these 2 familiar characters are just thrown into a completely different genre. And of course gets rid of a lot of the tension that the book was building up to. In terms of the plot, I've given it 2.5. It's a decent setup, but once it's all set up, it's kind of just the characters going place to place with very vague descriptions of what the zombies are getting up to throughout. I just think this novel had so much potential, but isn't the most enjoyable read in the world. In terms of pacing, I'm giving it 3.5. It was very decently paced. I didn't feel like it slowed down, really. But maybe at times it would have been nicer to slow down and maybe get some more character interactions for me to be invested in them more. I remember having a bit of a slow build up, but I mean that's expected for any horror really, so I'm not going to fault it for that. In terms of writing, I've given it 2.5. I just feel like the writing wasn't very engaging. Like I said earlier, it was a bit disorientating at times because of the lack of description, or kind of not knowing what's real and what's not, because the characters are just described to hear things all the time. Throwing in the legacy characters I think were a huge mistake. I feel like had the characters been more interesting, the zombies described, the rules regarding the zombies being clearer, and having not included Han and Chewie, I would have been a lot more invested in it and enjoyed reading it, which is a shame because I was quite looking forward to it. So this gives it an overall rating of 2.5. I think it's really down to personal preference for this one. It's not one I'd recommend to people, but it's also not the worst read in the world, and it's not too long of a book either, so even if you're unsure about reading it but you're really invested in like zombies and horror, I'd say give it a go for the sake of giving it a go. But if that genre doesn't really interest you and you kind of want to be a completionist and read all the Star Wars books and things, this one is skippable, I'd say. But I would like to see more of this genre. Like I said, there's potential for a book series similar to The Walking Dead, where if you get the characters written well enough, it could make for some good storytelling, and as long as it's secluded, could be part of canon as well. As I just think with this genre you just find out so much about characters and their motives and the kind of people that they really are, so there is potential for future things, but I don't think this was the best way to go around it. But that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed, despite it not being the most positive review in the world. Let me know what your thoughts are if you've read this novel. Also let me know what you'd do if you'd introduce zombies to Star Wars. Thank you all very much for watching, and may the Force be with you.